The cruelest invitations are the ones sent by people who already know exactly where your heart still hurts. The invitation arrived wrapped in cream-colored paper tied with silver ribbon, elegant enough to look expensive but cold enough to feel intentional. Hannah Collins stared at it for several long seconds before opening it, fingers already trembling for reasons she hated admitting to herself. Outside her tiny cottage window, snow drifted softly over Cedar Hollow, settling quietly across rooftops and frozen gardens, while winter afternoon light faded too quickly behind gray skies. Most people love this time of year. Hannah used to. Back when winter meant warmth instead of remembering. Slowly, carefully, she unfolded the card. Gold lettering stretched neatly across thick paper. Ryan and Madison request the honor of your presence at their engagement celebration. Her stomach tightened immediately. No, absolutely not. Her fingers nearly folded the invitation shut before something handwritten near the bottom caught her attention. Hope you can finally move on. Ryan. Hannah stopped breathing for one painful second. Of course he wrote that. Because somehow kindness always sounded crueler when it came from someone who once promised forever. She looked away quickly toward the frosted window beside her kitchen table. Snow continued falling in soft silence while somewhere outside distant laughter echoed faintly through the village square. People already knew. Of course they knew. Cedar Hollow was small enough that heartbreak became entertainment before healing ever had a chance. Ryan Parker was getting engaged. Ryan Parker invited his former mate. And everyone already understood exactly what this meant. Humiliation disguised as closure. Hannah lowered herself slowly into the old wooden chair near the fireplace, invitation still resting in pale hands that suddenly felt colder than before. The fire crackled softly nearby, but warmth no longer reached properly. Because the cruel thing about heartbreak was not the pain itself. It was remembering how deeply you once trusted the person causing it. Ryan had not always been cruel. That made everything worse somehow. Once upon a time, before grief changed the shape of everything, Ryan knew how she took too much honey and tea and hated thunderstorms after losing her mother. Once upon a time, he kissed her forehead after long workdays and promised quietly beneath moonlight that she would never feel alone again. They were young then, bonded early, hopeful enough to believe love survived anything. Until life became inconvenient. Until Hannah's father died unexpectedly, and the family store collapsed under debt. Until whispers around Cedar Hollow changed. Suddenly Hannah was no longer the daughter of one of the strongest families in town. She became the Omega with nothing. The girl everyone pitted politely while pretending not to notice how much smaller her life became. Ryan changed quietly at first. Missed dinners. Shorter conversations. Apologies that sounded distracted instead of sincere. Then came Madison Green. Beautiful. Wealthy. Daughter of one of the largest merchant families in the territory. Everything Hannah stopped being overnight. The rejection came publicly 3 months later during the harvest gathering. Ryan stood before half the pack and calmly explained that sometimes people simply outgrow each other. Hannah still remembered how carefully he avoided looking at her afterward. As though guilt became easier when you stopped seeing the damage clearly. Hannah swallowed hard now, forcing herself back into the present. That was nearly a year ago. She should be over it by now. Everyone expected her to be. Yet pain did not follow schedules people created for comfort. Some hurts stayed quiet long after people stopped asking whether you survived them. A soft knock startled her from her thoughts. Hannah blinked quickly before opening the cottage door. Her closest friend, Clara Bennett, stood outside wrapped tightly in a thick winter scarf, snow clinging lightly to dark curls. One glance at Hannah's expression and concern settled immediately across her face. "Oh no," Clara said quietly. "What happened?" Hannah held up the invitation without speaking. Clara read quickly, then exhaled sharply through her nose. "Absolutely not." Hannah laughed softly despite herself. "Small. Tired. That obvious?" Clara stepped inside quickly, already annoyed on Hannah's behalf. "Hannah, he did not invite you because he cares about closure." She lowered her voice carefully. "He invited you because half the town still feels guilty about what happened." Hannah looked down quietly. She knew that already. Ryan wanted everyone to see she was fine. Moved on. Smaller somehow. Maybe lonely enough to regret losing him. Madison probably wanted reassurance too. Public victory always felt safer when witnesses existed. Clara crossed her arms tightly. You are not going. Hannah hesitated, then looked back down at the invitation resting quietly in her hands. Something strange moved beneath the sadness. Not anger exactly, just exhaustion. Tired of disappearing. Tired of letting humiliation decide where she belonged. Slowly, softly, Hannah surprised even herself. I think I might. Clara stared at her in disbelief. Hannah. Hannah looked toward the falling snow outside again, voice quieter now. I am tired of hiding from people who already decided what my story looks like. She swallowed once. Hard. Maybe it is time I stop letting them tell it for me. Neither woman noticed the dark figure passing slowly beyond the cottage road outside moments later. A tall stranger moving quietly through the storm. Silver eyes briefly lingering toward Hannah's glowing window before disappearing into winter shadows. The cruel thing about losing someone was not always the heartbreak itself. Sometimes it was watching the world quietly decide your sadness had become old news while you were still learning how to survive it. Snow continued falling through Cedar Hollow the next morning, covering rooftops and narrow village roads in soft white silence. Hannah Collins stood near the front window of her tiny cottage, hands wrapped around a warm mug she had forgotten to drink from nearly 20 minutes ago. Outside, villagers moved carefully through frozen sidewalks carrying baskets and bundles of firewood, while smoke curled softly from chimneys into pale gray skies. Everything looked ordinary. Winter always made small towns look softer than they actually were. Kinder even. But Hannah knew better. Small towns remembered everything. Especially heartbreak. Especially humiliation. Especially girls who had once been chosen and then publicly left behind. The engagement invitation still rested on the kitchen table behind her like something alive enough to stare back. Cream-colored paper. Elegant gold lettering. Cruel kindness wrapped neatly in ribbon. Hope you can finally move on. Ryan's handwriting somehow hurt more in daylight, because it sounded so calm, so reasonable. Like he genuinely believed inviting his former mate to watch him build a new life counted as maturity instead of cruelty. Hannah exhaled slowly through her nose. She hated that part of her still cared. Hated that hearing his name still reached somewhere sore inside her chest before logic caught up. It had been almost a year. Nearly 11 months since Ryan Parker stood in front of half the pack during harvest gathering and calmly ended something she once believed would last forever. He did not yell. Did not insult her. Somehow that made it worse. Because cruelty spoken softly stayed longer. People change, Ryan said back then, unable to hold eye contact for more than a few seconds. Sometimes love changes too. Hannah remembered standing perfectly still, while everyone around them suddenly looked uncomfortable. No one stepped in. No one asked whether she was all right afterward. Not really. People rarely knew what to do with quiet heartbreak, especially when the girl hurting did not scream or make scenes. Hannah simply nodded politely that day, smiled once so nobody felt guilty, then walked home alone and quietly packed away every future she used to believe in. She still remembered removing framed photographs one by one because seeing happiness after betrayal felt unbearable. Funny thing about grief. It made ordinary objects dangerous. Across the room, her fireplace crackled softly while Clara Bennett sat curled beneath a blanket near the couch, watching Hannah with growing concern. You are thinking too hard again, Clara said gently. Hannah almost smiled despite herself. I always think too hard. Clara sighed dramatically. Fair point. Silence settled briefly between them while snow drifted softly outside. Then Clara glanced meaningfully toward the invitation on the table. You still do not have to go. Hannah looked down quietly. She knew that. Nobody would blame her for staying home. Most people expected her to. In fact, part of Cedar Hollow probably wanted her to. Sad Omega stays hidden while ex-mate moves on publicly. Easier story. Cleaner story. But something restless had settled inside Hannah since last night. Something quieter than anger. Stronger than embarrassment. Exhaustion, maybe. Tired of disappearing because someone else decided she should feel ashamed. I think, Hannah said slowly, fingers tightening slightly around her mug. I am tired of pretending I am the only person supposed to feel uncomfortable. Clara blinked once. Then again. Okay, she said carefully. That sounded suspiciously brave. Hannah laughed softly before she meant to. Small. Real. Maybe I am tired of being sad all the time. Clara smiled immediately. There she is. The warmth in her voice almost hurt, because kindness felt dangerous after heartbreak too. Before we continue, if stories about heartbreak, healing, and impossible second chances speak to you, remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel, so you do not miss more unforgettable journeys ahead. Now back to Hannah. Because somewhere beneath exhaustion and old hurt, something inside her had finally started shifting. Not healing exactly, but changing. Outside the cottage, wind moved softly through snow-covered trees while afternoon slowly approached. Hannah pulled on her winter coat a few hours later, needing air before overthinking swallowed her whole again. Cedar Hollow looked peaceful beneath winter skies. Children built snow forts near the village square. Shopkeepers swept powdery snow from wooden porches while soft music drifted faintly from bakery windows nearby. Yet whispers followed anyway. Quiet enough to pretend politeness. Loud enough to hear if you knew how people looked at pity. That is Hannah. Did you hear Ryan invited her? Poor thing. Hannah kept walking. Chin up. Eyes forward. Dignity sometimes looked like pretending words missed, when really they landed exactly where people intended. She turned toward the quieter road near the forest edge instead, needing silence more than company. Snow crunched softly beneath her boots while cold air sharpened against pale skin. The woods always helped. Fewer whispers there. Fewer memories. Then somewhere ahead, movement caught her attention. A dark figure standing near the frozen path, tall and unfamiliar against the snowfall. A man. Alone. Coat dusted white with snow. Something about the way he stood looked wrong somehow. Tired. Unsteady. Like winter had nearly taken more from him than it should. Hannah slowed instinctively, because kindness had always been her weakness. Even after heartbreak. Kindness was dangerous after heartbreak. Because even when someone shattered your trust, some part of you still wanted to believe pain had not changed who you were completely. Hannah Collins slowed instinctively as snow drifted harder across the narrow forest path. Cold wind brushing softly against her cheeks while pale afternoon light disappeared gradually behind heavy clouds. The stranger stood near the edge of the frozen road. Dark coat dusted with snow, shoulders slightly tense beneath winter exhaustion. Something about him looked wrong. Not frightening. Just tired in the kind of way people became after carrying too much for too long. Hannah hesitated. Common sense told her to keep walking. A woman alone in winter should not stop for unfamiliar men near isolated roads. But loneliness recognized loneliness faster than caution sometimes. And there was something strangely familiar in the way he stood there. Quiet. Guarded. Like someone too used to carrying things alone. Excuse me. Hannah called carefully, stopping several feet away. The man turned slowly at the sound of her voice. For one brief second, Hannah forgot what she planned to say. He was striking. Not handsome in an effortless way. More the kind of face life carved sharp over time. Tall. Broad shoulders beneath a dark winter coat. Dark hair slightly damp from snow. Pale skin touched faintly red by cold wind. But it was his eyes that unsettled her most. Silver. Sharp and strangely calm despite obvious exhaustion. Familiar somehow, though Hannah knew she had never seen him before. He looked surprised to see her standing there. Almost cautious. You should not be out here alone, he said quietly. His voice low. Controlled. Not unkind. Hannah almost laughed softly at that. That was actually what I was about to ask you. Something flickered briefly across his expression. Surprise maybe. Then amusement too small to fully become a smile. Hannah noticed then how cold he looked. Snow clung to the shoulders of his coat while his hands remained bare despite winter air sharp enough to sting exposed skin. Are you all right? She asked gently. The stranger hesitated. Just slightly too long. Fine, he answered eventually. Too quickly. Hannah knew that tone. Everyone hurting mastered it eventually. Fine meant exhausted. Fine meant lonely. Fine meant please stop asking before I accidentally tell the truth. Her eyes drifted lower briefly before noticing something else. His gloves were missing entirely. Fingers reddened from cold. Exhaustion settled visibly beneath silver eyes like sleep had become unfamiliar. You do not look fine, she said quietly. He blinked once as though not entirely used to honesty. Strange thing to say to a stranger, Hannah realized. Yet somehow awkwardness never arrived. Only concern. The man looked toward the snow-covered trees briefly before answering. Long journey. Hannah nodded slowly. Cedar Hollow sat far enough from main roads that travelers rarely appeared in winter storms unless something had gone wrong. Do you have somewhere to stay? She asked. Another hesitation. Not exactly. Of course not. Hannah exhaled softly through her nose, already knowing kindness would win this argument before practicality had a chance. Clara would probably call her reckless later. Still, cold winters punished loneliness hard enough without adding pride to the problem. There is a small diner near the village square, Hannah said carefully. Hot soup, coffee, warm place to sit for a while. The stranger studied her quietly then, long enough to feel unusual, not uncomfortable, just observant somehow, like he could not quite understand why she cared. You would help a stranger? He asked eventually. Hannah looked away briefly toward the falling snow. Funny question. Almost sad somehow. People helped me once, she answered quietly. Not entirely true anymore, but once had existed. Before grief changed things. Before pity replaced closeness. Before heartbreak made everyone awkward around pain. She offered a small smile anyway. Gentle. Habitual. And you look like someone who could use warm food. Something unreadable crossed his expression then. Quick enough to almost miss. Softened surprise maybe. Or confusion. As though kindness arrived somewhere he stopped expecting it. You do not know anything about me, he said quietly. Hannah laughed softly before she meant to. Small. Tired. Real. That makes two of us. For the first time the stranger almost smiled properly. Small. Brief. But enough to change something in the cold air between them. Snow drifted quietly around them while wind softened against frozen trees nearby. Strange thing about kindness. Sometimes it felt easier giving it away than receiving it. Hannah turned slightly toward town. Come on, she said gently. You can at least have something warm before winter tries to win. The stranger hesitated only a moment before quietly following beside her. Neither noticed the pair of distant black SUVs parked far enough down the road to stay hidden behind snow-covered trees. Men waiting patiently inside. Watching carefully. Waiting for orders that never seemed to come. Because somewhere behind calm silver eyes, Alpha King Damien Ashford had suddenly become far more interested in the quiet Omega woman walking beside him than anything waiting back at the palace. The diner smelled like cinnamon coffee, fresh bread, and the kind of warmth lonely people noticed immediately. Hannah Collins pushed open the wooden door carefully, cold wind slipping briefly inside behind them before warmth settled softly again. Bells above the entrance chimed once. Familiar. Comforting. Small-town familiar. A few people glanced up automatically from booths near frosted windows. Then paused. Of course they did. Cedar Hollow noticed everything. Especially when Hannah Collins entered town beside a man nobody recognized. Especially a man who looked like trouble in the dangerous kind of way people quietly stared at before pretending not to. Tall. Broad shoulders beneath a dark winter coat. Calm silver eyes. Handsome enough to unsettle curiosity immediately. Hannah felt the whispers begin before anyone even spoke aloud. She ignored them. Practice made that easier. You can sit here, she said quietly, guiding the stranger toward a booth near the back where warmth from the fireplace reached strongest. The man hesitated briefly before sliding into the seat across from her. Movements calm despite obvious exhaustion. Up close, winter looked harsher on him somehow. Snow still melted slowly from dark hair. Shadows lingered faintly beneath silver eyes like sleep had become unfamiliar for longer than it should. Hannah set her gloves carefully on the table. Coffee? She asked gently. Or tea? The stranger looked oddly surprised by the question. Whichever you prefer, he answered after a moment. Hannah frowned softly. That sounds suspiciously like someone too tired to choose. Something dangerously close to amusement flickered briefly across his face again. Small. Controlled. Yet real enough to soften something sharp around him. Coffee, he said quietly. Black. Hannah nodded once before standing to order. Behind the counter, old Mrs. Waverly watched curiously while pouring fresh coffee into steaming mugs. Friend of yours? she asked softly, already too interested. Hannah almost laughed. Not exactly. Mrs. Waverly raised one knowing eyebrow. Hannah pretended not to notice, because explaining strangers became impossible when you barely understood why kindness made you stop in the first place. A few minutes later, Hannah returned balancing coffee and warm soup while the stranger sat quietly watching snowfall beyond the frosted glass. Something lonely lived around him. Not obvious loneliness. The dangerous kind. Quiet. Hidden. Like someone important enough that nobody asked whether he felt tired anymore. Here, Hannah said gently, setting the bowl down in front of him. Steam rose softly into the air. Chicken soup. Fresh bread. Nothing special, but warm. His silver eyes lingered briefly on the meal before lifting back to her. You really did not have to do this. Hannah shrugged lightly while wrapping cold fingers around her own tea. Maybe I wanted to. Silence settled comfortably for a moment. Outside, snow drifted softly while voices murmured quietly around the diner. Somewhere nearby, children laughed over hot chocolate. Normal winter sounds. Safe sounds. Strange how quickly ordinary places made heavy things feel smaller. Do you always help strangers? He asked eventually. Hannah smiled faintly into her tea. No. He tilted his head slightly. Curious now. Then why me? Good question. Hannah thought about it for a second longer than expected, because truth sounded strange out loud. You looked lonely, she admitted quietly. The stranger stopped moving completely. Coffee halfway lifted. Silver eyes fixed on her like nobody had said something honest to him in a very long time. Hannah immediately looked down, suddenly embarrassed. Sorry, she added quickly. That probably sounded weird. No, he said softly after a pause. Just accurate. Something shifted quietly between them then. Small. Invisible maybe. But there. The kind of moment loneliness recognized before logic interrupted. Hannah studied him carefully now. You still have not told me your name. Brief hesitation. Strange enough to notice. Then quietly. Damien. Not technically a lie. Just incomplete. Hannah smiled softly. Hannah. He nodded once, repeating it quietly like testing the sound. Hannah. Somehow hearing her name in his voice unsettled her unexpectedly. Calm. Warm. Strange. Before awkwardness could grow, the diner door opened sharply again. Cold air swept briefly inside, and with it came Ryan Parker. Hannah froze immediately. Of course today would do this to her. Ryan stood near the entrance brushing snow from his coat. Madison beside him wrapped elegantly in cream-colored winter wool. Beautiful. Effortless. Everything Hannah once believed she failed to be. Ryan looked up casually, then stopped completely when he saw her. More specifically, when he saw who sat across from her. Surprise flickered first, then something sharper. Confusion maybe. Madison noticed too. Her expression shifted almost instantly into something politely curious. Dangerous thing about small towns. People always wanted stories. Ryan approached slowly after a moment, forced smile already appearing. Familiar enough to hurt. Hannah, he said lightly. Too casually. Too comfortable. Like heartbreak had never happened. His eyes flickered briefly toward Damien. Did not expect to see you here. Hannah straightened slightly without meaning to. Because somehow old wounds still remembered weakness too quickly. Ryan smiled politely toward Damien. Friend of yours. Before Hannah could answer, Damien calmly set down his coffee. Silver eyes lifting slowly toward Ryan with impossible composure. Quiet power settled suddenly around the booth like winter itself holding breath. Something like that, Damien said quietly. The entire diner felt smaller after Damien spoke. Something like that. 3 quiet words, calm enough to sound harmless. Yet somehow the temperature in the room changed anyway. Even Ryan noticed. Hannah saw it immediately in the way his smile faltered for half a second before returning. Small towns taught people how to notice power even when nobody explained it. And there was something about the stranger sitting across from Hannah that unsettled ordinary confidence. He did not look intimidated. Did not shift awkwardly. Did not seem interested in proving anything. He simply sat there. Calm silver eyes resting on Ryan with the kind of composure people carried when life stopped surprising them long ago. Madison noticed too. Hannah saw the quick glance she gave Damien. Curious. Careful. Almost impressed despite herself. Well, Ryan said lightly after an awkward pause, forcing warmth back into his voice. Any friend of Hannah's is welcome in Cedar Hollow. Hannah almost laughed at that. Friend of Hannah's. Strange how quickly people became polite when witnesses existed. Strange how memory worked too. Ryan used to know exactly how she liked winter tea, and which songs made her cry when she was overwhelmed. Now he spoke to her like someone politely greeting a distant acquaintance. Maybe heartbreak really did turn people into strangers. Damien remained calm. That is kind of you, he said quietly. Nothing rude. Nothing sharp. Yet somehow Ryan shifted slightly anyway, as though unsure why standing here suddenly felt uncomfortable. Hannah hated that familiar nervousness creeping into her chest. Old instincts. Old pain. Because sitting across from Ryan still reached somewhere sore she wished no longer existed. Memories move too quickly sometimes. Moonlit walks. Shared dreams. Plans for homes that never happened. Losing someone once promised forever felt strangely humiliating afterward. Like grieving publicly for something everyone else moved on from already. Madison smiled politely toward Hannah now, graceful in cream-colored winter wool. Beautiful. Effortless. Exactly the kind of woman Cedar Hollow expected beside Ryan. We have not seen you around much lately, Madison said gently. Too gently. Like politeness carefully hiding something sharper underneath. Hannah recognized that tone. Small-town sympathy often arrived dressed as concern. I have been busy, Hannah answered quietly. Ryan nodded once. Still at the bookstore? Hannah swallowed softly. Funny how easily embarrassment returned. Yes. Still working small shifts organizing old books and managing inventory, because life changed after losing family money. Because survival looks smaller than dreams sometimes. Yes, she answered simply. Ryan smiled again. Familiar enough to hurt. Good, he said lightly. Glad things are working out. Hannah looked down at her tea immediately. There it was. The thing she hated most. Pity. She almost wished he had been cruel instead. Cruelty at least felt honest. Damien noticed the change instantly. The way Hannah's shoulders tightened. The way her fingers curled faintly around the mug, like she suddenly needed somewhere safe to place nervousness. His silver eyes moved calmly back toward Ryan. Quiet. Observant. Hannah seems thoughtful, Damien said evenly. Kind too. Ryan blinked once. Slightly caught off guard. Sure, he answered quickly. Always has been. Always has been. Funny phrase. Like kindness became something easy to overlook after enough time passed. Damien leaned back slightly, expression unreadable. Rare quality, he said softly. Silence followed. Brief but uncomfortable enough that Ryan suddenly looked unsure whether conversation still belonged to him. Hannah noticed it too. Strange thing about Damien. He never raised his voice. Never acted aggressive. Yet somehow the space around him quietly rearranged itself. Like confidence naturally moved toward him without permission. Madison cleared her throat gently. Actually, she said, smiling politely toward Hannah, we hope to see you Saturday. Hannah stiffened immediately. Of course. The engagement celebration. The invitation. The humiliation wrapped neatly in silver ribbon. Ryan's expression shifted quickly, too quick to hide discomfort. No pressure, he added lightly. Only if you want. Hannah almost stared at him. Only if you want. After handwriting hope you can finally move on across expensive invitation paper? Funny thing about people. They rewrote history fastest when guilt finally arrived. Before Hannah could answer, Damien spoke quietly. Saturday. Ryan nodded. Engagement party. His smile returned carefully. Big event. Whole town. Something unreadable flickered briefly across Damien's expression. Small enough to miss unless someone looked closely. Curious now. Attentive. Sounds important, he said evenly. Madison smiled brightly. Very. Hannah suddenly wanted to leave. Exhaustion settled quietly against her chest again. Too much pretending. Too much memory. Too much standing inside old hurt while pretending none of it still mattered. She reached slowly for her gloves. We should probably go. Ryan looked surprised. Maybe disappointed. Hard to tell. Already. Hannah nodded softly. Long day. She stood carefully, winter coat settling around narrow shoulders while cold anxiety followed automatically. But then something unexpected happened. Damien stood too. Calmly. Effortlessly. And somehow the movement alone changed everything. Because standing he looked even taller. Sharper somehow. Presence impossible to ignore. Ryan noticed immediately. Madison too. Damien reached quietly for the check before Hannah could protest. I appreciate the company, he said softly toward her. Real gratitude in his voice. Strange warmth touched somewhere tired inside Hannah unexpectedly. Outside, snow continued falling softly beyond diner windows. Ryan hesitated once more before speaking. Maybe we will see you Saturday. Hannah almost answered automatically. Maybe. Polite. Safe. Instead, something quieter shifted beneath old sadness. Tired of hiding. Tired of shrinking. She lifted her chin slightly. Small movement. But real. Maybe you will, she said softly. Damien noticed immediately. The quiet strength hiding beneath heartbreak. And for reasons he did not entirely understand yet, something about it made him want to stay. Snow followed them quietly when they stepped back outside. Soft flakes settling against rooftops and frozen sidewalks while Cedar Hollow wrapped itself in winter silence again. Hannah pulled her coat tighter against the cold, exhaling softly as breath disappeared into pale afternoon air. Beside her, Damien walked with unusual calm, hands resting quietly inside dark coat pockets while snow caught lightly in dark hair. Strange thing about strangers. Sometimes silence with them felt easier than silence with people who already knew too much. Neither spoke immediately. The diner door closed behind them, carrying whispers and curiosity safely out of reach. Hannah appreciated that more than she expected. Small towns could make breathing feel difficult sometimes, especially after heartbreak became public history. You handled that well, Damien said quietly after several moments. Hannah glanced at him briefly. Handled what? A hint of amusement touched his expression. Small. Controlled. Pretending you were not uncomfortable. Hannah laughed softly despite herself. Not happy exactly. More tired honesty than humor. I was uncomfortable. Damien nodded once. I noticed. Strange. Nobody usually noticed. Or maybe they did and simply chose easier conversations instead. Hannah lowered her gaze toward the snowy sidewalk ahead. Ryan and I. She stopped briefly, searching for words less embarrassing than truth. We used to be together. Damien remained quiet, listening in the rare way people listen when they genuinely cared what came next. No interruption. No pity. Just presence. Dangerous thing about kindness. It arrived where loneliness hurt most. Hannah exhaled softly. He invited me to his engagement party. Damien slowed slightly beside her, silver eyes turning toward her more carefully now. That sounds complicated. Hannah almost smiled at the understatement. That is a polite way to say humiliating. Snow crunched softly beneath their boots while wind moved gently through bare winter trees nearby. For a moment neither spoke again. Then Damien asked quietly, why go? Good question. Clara asked the same thing. Truthfully, Hannah still did not fully know. Pride maybe. Exhaustion too. Tired of hiding while everyone quietly decided heartbreak made her smaller. Because I am tired, she admitted softly after a while. Tired of avoiding places because someone else decided I should feel ashamed. Damien looked at her then. Really looked. And something shifted quietly in his expression. Respect maybe. Because she said it softly. No bitterness. No cruelty. Just tired dignity. Most people would stay home, he said eventually. Hannah shrugged lightly. Most people probably know how to stop caring faster. Damien went strangely quiet after that. Because somewhere beneath palace politics and impossible responsibilities, he knew something about loneliness too. More than most people guessed. Power had strange ways of isolating people. Everyone wanted something eventually. Loyalty. Approval. Fear. Very few offered kindness without knowing who stood in front of them. Yet this woman had stopped in freezing weather for a stranger because he looked lonely. Bought him soup because cold felt cruel. Listened without asking for anything back. He had not realized how unusual that was until now. Ahead, Hannah paused near the edge of the village square. Evening light settled softly across snow-covered storefronts while lanterns flickered warmly to life. "Well," she said quietly, brushing snow lightly from her sleeve, "this is me." Her cottage sat only another short walk down the road. Damien nodded slowly. Strange reluctance settled unexpectedly somewhere uncomfortable beneath his chest. Unfamiliar enough to irritate him slightly. He should leave. There were meetings waiting. Guards already worried. Advisors probably halfway to panic. Yet somehow leaving felt strangely wrong. "Hannah," he said quietly before thinking too hard. She looked up. Silver blue eyes calmer now beneath winter light. "About Saturday." She blinked once. "Engagement party." "Right." Embarrassment returned immediately. "What about it?" Damien hesitated only briefly, then calmly asked, "Would you allow me to accompany you?" Hannah stared at him, completely still. Snow drifted softly around them while somewhere nearby distant Christmas music floated faintly from bakery windows. Surely she heard wrong. "What?" Damien remained calm, entirely too calm for something so absurd. "You said yourself they expect humiliation," he answered evenly. "Seems unfair to attend alone." Hannah almost laughed because the suggestion felt impossible, completely ridiculous. "Damien," she said gently, "you do not even know me." Something unreadable crossed his expression briefly. "I know enough." The words landed strangely. Too warm somehow. Dangerous too. Hannah looked away quickly. "You really do not have to feel sorry for me." Damien frowned immediately. This has nothing to do with pity. The certainty in his voice unsettled her unexpectedly. Before awkwardness stretched too far, movement caught attention near the road behind them. A sleek black vehicle slowly approached through falling snow before stopping several feet away. Another behind it. Expensive. Out of place in Cedar Hollow. Hannah frowned softly. Damien exhaled once beneath his breath. Quiet annoyance. Of course they found him. A sharply dressed older man stepped quickly from the first vehicle, expression visibly relieved before concern replaced it. "Sir," he said carefully. Hannah blinked immediately. "Sir?" Damien closed his eyes briefly like someone already exhausted. The older man looked between them once, then lowered his voice urgently. "The council has been waiting 6 hours." Silence followed, heavy enough to feel strange. Hannah slowly turned back toward Damien. Something about this suddenly no longer felt ordinary at all. Hannah Collins suddenly felt very cold. Not because of winter, because nothing about this made sense anymore. Snow drifted softly around the village square while the older man stood stiffly beside the black vehicle, expression carefully controlled in the way people looked when something important had gone very wrong. "Sir." The word echoed strangely inside Hannah's head. "The council has been waiting 6 hours." She slowly turned toward Damien again, toward the quiet stranger who somehow no longer looked entirely like a stranger at all, because suddenly little things rearranged themselves in memory. The calm confidence, the impossible stillness, the way Ryan became uncomfortable without understanding why. Even the black coffee. Somehow it suddenly felt absurdly formal. Damien exhaled softly through his nose, one hand briefly pressing against the bridge of it like exhaustion had finally caught him. "Elias," he said quietly toward the older man. "Timing." Elias looked genuinely apologetic. "Respectfully, sir, timing stopped existing 4 hours ago." Hannah blinked once. Then again. "Sir." "Council." Expensive vehicles waiting hidden near forest roads. Her pulse stumbled slightly. "Damien," she said carefully, voice quieter now. "Who exactly are you?" Silence followed. Brief, yet strangely heavy. Damien looked at her then, silver eyes softer than before but carrying something quieter underneath now. Reluctance, maybe. Like truth complicated something he unexpectedly did not want ruined. "Someone who owes you honesty," he said finally. Hannah waited. Snow settled lightly against her coat sleeves while cold wind moved softly through nearby trees. Somewhere across town, distant church bells echoed faintly through winter air. Damien glanced briefly toward Elias before back to her. Then calmly said words Hannah genuinely did not expect. "My full name is Damien Ashford." Hannah frowned faintly. The name sounded familiar. Too familiar. Then realization landed suddenly hard enough to steal breath entirely. Ashford. No. No way. Alpha King Damien Ashford, ruler of the Northern Territories. The Alpha King people in Cedar Hollow barely spoke about without lowering voices. The man powerful enough to settle territorial disputes between entire packs. The man magazines wrote about. The man impossible enough to feel more myth than person. Hannah stared, completely still. Because no, absolutely not. This quiet stranger who drank soup in diners and looked lonely during snowstorms could not possibly be the Alpha King. Damien saw realization arrive in real time. Saw disbelief too. I know, he said quietly before awkwardness swallowed everything. Not exactly ideal timing. Hannah almost laughed because shock made everything feel ridiculous. Instead, she simply stood there blinking at him like reality suddenly needed several extra explanations. You are the Alpha King, she repeated softly. Damien nodded once. Calmly. Like this happened every day. Technically. Hannah almost laughed again. Somewhere behind them, Elias looked deeply uncomfortable standing inside what felt increasingly like emotional chaos. Sir, he tried gently, the council. Damien lifted one hand slightly without looking away from Hannah. Elias immediately fell silent. Hannah noticed that too. Of course people listened to him immediately. He carried authority too naturally for it to look rehearsed. Strange thing about power. Real power rarely needed loud voices. Hannah looked down briefly, suddenly embarrassed in ways she could not explain. Memories arrived too fast. Offering soup. Asking if he felt lonely. Teasing him for not choosing coffee properly. Good heavens. She nearly invited the Alpha King into her tiny cottage for leftovers. Heat rushed painfully into her cheeks despite winter cold. I am so sorry, she said quickly. I did not know. Damien frowned slightly. Why are you apologizing? Hannah looked up helplessly. Because I made you eat diner soup. For one stunned second, Damien simply stared at her. Then unexpectedly laughed. Quiet. Real. Warm enough to surprise even himself. Elias looked alarmed because apparently nobody witnessed that often. Hannah, Damien said gently after the laugh softened. That soup was the nicest thing anyone has done for me all month. The honesty in his voice unsettled her unexpectedly. Because somehow he sounded sincere. Completely sincere. No royal distance. No arrogance. Just tired truth. Hannah looked down briefly. Still, she murmured softly, I probably should have acted differently. Damien's expression shifted immediately. Softer now. Serious. Please do not. She blinked slightly. What? Do not change how you were 5 minutes ago. His voice lowered quietly. Honest enough to matter. That version of you stopped for a stranger in winter because she thought he looked lonely. He hesitated briefly, then added softly, nobody does that anymore. Something painful moved quietly beneath Hannah's chest. Because loneliness recognized loneliness after all. Even kings apparently. Snow drifted softly between them while evening settled deeper across Cedar Hollow. Damien glanced briefly toward the waiting vehicles before back to her again, reluctance returning unexpectedly. I still mean what I said earlier, he added calmly. About Saturday. Hannah blinked once. Engagement party. Ryan. Humiliation waiting neatly wrapped in silver ribbon. You cannot possibly be serious, she said quietly. Damien's silver eyes held hers steadily. Calm. Certain. I am entirely serious. Somewhere behind him, Elias looked like someone trying desperately not to question his entire career. Damien stepped slightly closer, not enough to overwhelm. Just enough that sincerity landed harder. You said they planned something humiliating, he said quietly. Then perhaps they should be reminded that people worth underestimating are usually the ones everyone regrets misjudging. Hannah stopped breathing for one impossible second. Because suddenly, absurdly, terrifyingly, Alpha King Damien Ashford looked completely serious about showing up to her ex-mate's engagement party. Saturday arrived wrapped in winter sunlight sharp enough to make everything look cleaner than it actually was. Snow still covered Cedar Hollow in soft white layers while lanterns and silver decorations lined the streets leading toward the grand event hall near the center of town. From outside, the engagement celebration looked beautiful. Warm golden lights glowing through tall windows. Elegant winter wreaths hanging from stone walls. Music drifting softly into the cold afternoon air. The kind of gathering people spent weeks talking about afterward. Inside, however, something quieter unfolded beneath the celebration. Anticipation. Curiosity. Small-town curiosity sharpened by memory. Because everyone knew Hannah Collins received an invitation. Everyone quietly wondered whether she would be brave enough to show up. Or foolish enough. Ryan Parker stood near the center of the ballroom adjusting his dark suit jacket, while guests moved around him carrying drinks and warm desserts. Madison looked beautiful beside him in soft ivory silk, glowing beneath crystal lights while relatives congratulated them one by one. Everything looked perfect, carefully perfect. Yet Ryan found himself glancing toward the entrance far more often than necessary. Madison noticed immediately. "You think she is coming," she said quietly. Ryan shrugged too casually. "Does not matter." But it did matter. More than he wanted to admit. Because somewhere uncomfortable beneath confidence, curiosity lingered. Hannah had always avoided conflict. Avoided public attention. Most likely she stayed home. Probably curled beneath blankets pretending this night did not exist. Easier that way. Better honestly. Madison adjusted her bracelet slowly. Maybe inviting her was too much. Ryan frowned slightly. "I was trying to be mature." The sentence sounded weaker out loud. Because somewhere deep down even he knew handwriting hope you can finally move on. At the bottom of the invitation crossed lines maturity rarely touched. Around them whispers moved quietly between guests. "Do you think Hannah will come? Poor girl. I heard she has not been the same since the rejection. Honestly, I would never show my face." Funny thing about pity. People disguised cruelty inside concern and called it kindness. Across town meanwhile, Hannah stood frozen near her cottage mirror wondering whether courage always felt this much like panic. The simple dark blue dress hanging softly against her frame looked elegant enough. Modest. Quiet. Nothing dramatic. Clara stood behind her with arms crossed tightly. Equal parts emotional support and protective older sister energy. "You still have time to fake illness," Clara offered gently. Hannah almost laughed despite nerves threatening to swallow her alive. "Very comforting." Clara sighed dramatically. "I am serious. You owe these people absolutely nothing." Hannah looked down briefly, smoothing nervous fingers across her sleeves. Maybe Clara was right. Maybe staying home would hurt less. Except something had changed this week. Small. Quiet. But real. Because for the first time in nearly a year, Hannah no longer felt ashamed of existing. Somewhere between diner soup and impossible conversations beside falling snow, something fragile started rebuilding itself. Not confidence exactly. Just dignity remembered. Then came the soft knock at the door. Both women froze. Clara blinked first. "Please tell me that is not." Hannah swallowed hard. "No. Impossible. Surely not." She opened the cottage door carefully, then forgot how to breathe. Because standing beneath soft winter light, dark coat dusted lightly with snow, silver eyes impossibly calm, stood Damien Ashford. Only now there was nothing hidden anymore. No tired traveler. No quiet stranger lost in snow. He looked unmistakably royal without trying. Elegant charcoal coat tailored perfectly. Dark hair brushed neatly back. Presence calm enough to quiet entire rooms without effort. Behind him, a sleek black vehicle waited silently near the road while two guards stood respectfully at a distance. Hannah suddenly became very aware of how small her cottage looked. Damien's silver eyes softened slightly the moment he saw her. Real warmth there. Familiar somehow despite everything impossible surrounding it. "Good evening, Hannah," he said quietly. Clara nearly stopped functioning entirely. Hannah opened her mouth once. Then again. Words completely abandoned her. Damien's expression shifted almost imperceptibly toward amusement. "You look worried," he said gently. Hannah blinked quickly. "You actually came." Something unreadable crossed his face briefly. "Soften maybe." "I said I would." Strange thing about reliability. It became dangerous after heartbreak. Because Ryan once promised forever too. Yet somehow Damien standing here felt different. Steadier somehow. Like certainty wore quieter clothes. Clara stepped awkwardly forward after finally remembering how breathing worked. "You are actually the Alpha King," she whispered before she could stop herself. Damien inclined his head politely. "Technically." Hannah nearly laughed because somehow even now he still sounded like the man who accepted diner soup without complaint. Outside, snow drifted softly while evening settled deeper around Cedar Hollow. Somewhere across town, whispers still moved through the engagement party about whether Hannah Collins would show up at all. None of them were prepared for what waited outside her cottage door. Damien offered his arm calmly then. Quiet confidence. No performance. No pressure. Just sincerity. "Ready?" he asked softly. Hannah looked at him for one impossible second. Then toward her reflection in the window. For the first time in nearly a year, she did not look broken. Nervous? Yes. Scared? Absolutely. But broken? No. Slowly, softly, Hannah took a breath. Then placed her hand gently against the Alpha King's arm. The ballroom fell quiet before anyone understood why. First it happened slowly. Conversations softened. Laughter faded strangely near the entrance. Glasses paused halfway toward lips while heads turned one after another toward the enormous front doors beneath winter garlands and crystal lights. Something about the atmosphere shifted. Like the room itself suddenly understood something important had just arrived. Ryan Parker noticed first. Standing near the center of the ballroom beside Madison, he looked automatically toward the entrance with mild irritation already prepared. Probably another late guest. Nothing important. Then the doors opened. And for one impossible second Ryan genuinely forgot how to breathe. Because Hannah Collins walked inside. Calm. Graceful. Entirely different from what everyone expected. She wore no dramatic gown. No glittering revenge dress designed to make people jealous. Just quiet elegance. A dark blue winter dress soft against pale skin. Simple enough to look timeless instead of expensive. Her light brown hair rested softly against her shoulders while silver blue eyes held something unfamiliar now. Not sadness exactly. Not insecurity either. Peace maybe. The kind built painfully. Quiet dignity wrapped carefully around old heartbreak. But Hannah was not why the room stopped breathing. It was the man beside her. Tall. Broad shoulders beneath a dark tailored coat. Silver eyes impossible to mistake. Presence quiet enough to feel dangerous without effort. Calm power moved with him naturally, the kind people recognized before names even arrived. And suddenly whispers spread through the ballroom so fast they almost sounded like fear. "No way. Is that? That cannot possibly be. The Alpha King?" Madison's expression froze first. Ryan followed seconds later. Complete disbelief landing harder than embarrassment ever could. Because standing beside Hannah Collins like he belonged there somehow was Alpha King Damien Ashford himself. Hannah felt panic rising immediately beneath her ribs. Too many eyes. Too much silence. Entire rooms had never looked at her this way before. Yet beside her, Damien remained impossibly calm. One hand resting naturally near hers. Steady presence instead of pressure. Quiet enough to say without speaking, "You are not alone tonight." Funny thing about confidence. Sometimes it borrowed strength before becoming your own. Damien leaned slightly closer, voice low enough only she heard. "Breathe." Hannah blinked once. Realized she had nearly forgotten. Then exhaled slowly. Across the ballroom, Ryan finally stepped forward after recovering enough to pretend composure still existed. Smile forced now. Unsteady around the edges. "Hannah," he said too quickly. "You made it." Funny how people change tone when witnesses mattered. Hannah noticed immediately. No pity now. No casual superiority. Just confusion wrapped awkwardly in politeness. "I did," she answered softly. Ryan's eyes shifted instantly toward Damien again. Uncertainty visible now. "And you brought..." He stopped because apparently language abandoned him too. Damien extended calm politeness effortlessly. "Damien Ashford," he said evenly. Like everyone somehow already did not know. Ryan swallowed almost visibly. Madison stood perfectly still beside him, smile completely gone. Around them whispers only grew louder. Cedar Hollow loved stories. But nobody prepared for this version. The rejected Omega arriving with the Alpha King. Impossible stories traveled fastest. Ryan tried again. "Your Majesty." he said carefully, clearly unsettled. We did not realize, Damien remained calm, that Hannah would have company? The sentence landed softly, respectfully, yet somehow sharper than confrontation ever needed to be. Ryan shifted slightly. Madison recovered enough to smile politely again. We are honored, she said carefully. This is unexpected. Damien glanced briefly toward Hannah before back to them. I imagine so. Small silence followed, uncomfortable enough to matter. Then Ryan laughed awkwardly. Well, he said quickly, trying desperately to reclaim confidence, Hannah and I go way back. Something shifted subtly in Damien's expression then. Calm, curious, dangerous only because confidence no longer needed proving. So I have heard, he answered quietly. Ryan hesitated, then smiled too casually. Things did not exactly work out. Hannah felt old embarrassment threatening briefly again. Familiar ache. Yet before shame fully arrived, Damien spoke. Calm voice. No anger. No cruelty. Just impossible certainty. Some people misunderstand loyalty when they are lucky enough to receive it, he said quietly. Entire ballroom suddenly felt smaller. Ryan stopped smiling. Madison looked away briefly. Nobody interrupted. Because the thing about real power was this. It never needed volume. Damien's silver eyes rested calmly on Ryan another moment. Usually, he continued softly, they only recognize value after someone else notices it first. Silence. Complete silence. Hannah felt something inside her chest shift painfully, warmly, because for the first time since heartbreak happened, someone stood beside her without embarrassment, without pity, without asking her to shrink smaller for comfort. Across the room, whispers completely changed shape now. No longer sympathy. Awe. Shock. Regret. Funny thing about dignity. People ignored it until someone powerful pointed directly toward it. Ryan looked at Hannah differently now. Really differently. Like suddenly he remembered every soft thing he overlooked too easily. The kindness. The loyalty. The girl who stood beside him before life became inconvenient. Too late always arrived quietly. Damien turned toward Hannah then, expression softening slightly. Would you like some air? He asked gently. Not rescue. Choice. Always choice. Hannah looked around the ballroom once more. At faces suddenly careful. At whispers suddenly respectful. At Ryan standing speechless beside the future he chose. Then slowly, quietly she smiled. Small. Real. And somehow that smile shattered something Ryan would spend far too long trying to understand.